In the cold silence of a distant moon, humanity clung to life like a flickering flame in an endless night. Centuries had passed since Earth was reduced to a memory, a dusty scar floating in the void. To the rest of the galaxy, humans were nothing more than myths, tales whispered around alien campfires to warn against hubris and greed. But on this desolate rock orbiting Epsilon 7, hidden beneath jagged cliffs and swirling dust storms, a small group of survivors carried the torch of their ancestors. Cale Armitage crouched low inside the crumbling ruins of what once might have been a grand hall. His gloved hands brushed away layers of dirt from the cracked surface of an ancient control panel. He was young, barely 20, but his sharp mind and relentless curiosity set him apart. Around him, shadows danced as dim light filtered through cracks in the ceiling. The air smelled stale, metallic, and faintly sweet, like rust mingling with something organic long decayed. "Cale," came a voice behind him, breaking the stillness. It belonged to Sarah, one of the few who tolerated his endless tinkering. She leaned against the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest. Her dark hair was tied back tightly, and her piercing green eyes studied him with equal parts skepticism and concern. "You've been down here for hours. What are you even looking for?" He didn't answer immediately, his focus fixed on the strange symbols etched into the panel. They glowed faintly now, responding to some unknown trigger he'd accidentally activated. "I think it's a map," he said finally, tracing the lines with his fingers. "An old one." Sarah stepped closer, her boots crunching softly against the debris-strewn floor. "A map? Of what? More ruins?" She sighed heavily, shaking her head. "We don't need another ruin, Cale. We need food, medicine, things that actually keep us alive." But Cale wasn't listening. His heart raced as the glowing lines began forming patterns he recognized. Not just random shapes, but constellations. A star chart. This wasn't just any map. It pointed towards something far beyond their little moon. Something important. "Elysium Station," he murmured under his breath, reading the faded inscription at the bottom of the panel. "What did you say?" Sarah asked sharply, her tone shifting. "It's a place," Cale replied, standing up straight, his face lit with excitement, despite the grime smudging his cheeks. "A human outpost. Maybe the last one." Sarah stared at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she let out a bitter laugh. "The elders won't believe this. They'll call it nonsense, just like they always do." "They don't have to believe me," Cale said firmly, meeting her gaze. "Because I'm going there." Sarah's laughter died instantly. "Are you insane? You're talking about leaving everything we've built here. For what?" "Some ghost story written in glowy lines." "It's not just a story," Cale snapped, his voice rising. "Don't you get it? If Elysium exists, it could change everything. It could give us answers, weapons, technology, anything. We can't stay trapped on this rock forever." For a long while, Sarah said nothing. Finally, she exhaled deeply and looked away. "Fine. Say you find this station. Then what? You think the Valens aren't watching every move we make? One wrong step, and we're all dead." Cale clenched his jaw but didn't argue further. He knew she was right. The risk was enormous. But deep down, he also knew they couldn't survive much longer without taking chances. Humanity's future depended on boldness, not fear. As they left the ruins together, Cale couldn't shake the image of the glowing star map from his mind. Somewhere out there, beyond the endless void, lay hope, or perhaps destruction. Either way, he was determined to find out. The idea of leaving their hidden moon was met with outrage. Cale stood in the center of the dimly lit council chamber, his hands trembling slightly as he faced the elders. The room smelled of damp stone and burning oil from the flickering lanterns that hung on rusted hooks. Around him, faces etched with years of hardship stared back, some skeptical, others outright hostile. "You want us to risk everything," one elder said, her voice sharp like a blade. "For what?" A map you found scribbled on some broken piece of junk. It's not just scribbles. Cale shot back, trying to keep his tone steady. He held up the fragment of the star chart he'd salvaged, its faint glow casting eerie shadows across his face. This is proof. Proof that Elysium Station exists. Proof that humanity didn't vanish completely. Another elder leaned forward, his gnarled fingers gripping the edge of the wooden table. Even if it's real, boy, do you have any idea what you're asking? Venturing into Valen space means certain death. They've forgotten about us because we stay quiet. You step out there, and you'll paint a target on every single one of us. Cale clenched his jaw, frustration bubbling inside him. He knew they were right to be afraid. The Valens weren't known for mercy, but fear had kept them cowering for centuries. If no one took a stand, humanity would fade entirely. Before he could respond, the door creaked open, and Lyra slipped inside. She carried herself with quiet confidence, her dark eyes scanning the room before landing on Cale. In her arms, she clutched a battered datapad filled with calculations and star charts she'd been working on tirelessly since hearing about Cale's discovery. "Let me show you something," she said calmly, stepping closer to the table. Without waiting for permission, she activated the device, projecting holographic images of potential routes through uncharted sectors. If we avoid major trade lanes and stick to asteroid fields, we can minimize detection. It's risky, yes, but not impossible. The elders exchanged uneasy glances. One man scoffed. "And who exactly is going to go on this suicide mission?" "You." "No," Lyra replied firmly. "I'm offering my skills because I believe in what Cale is trying to do. But he won't be alone." She turned toward the doorway, where two figures now stood. Dax, a grizzled ex-miner with a permanent scowl etched onto his face, crossed his arms over his broad chest. Beside him, Sarah lingered, her expression unreadable, but her presence undeniable. "We're in," Dax growled, his gravelly voice cutting through the tension. "Not because I trust your crazy plan, kid, but because sitting here waiting to die isn't much better." Sarah gave a curt nod, though her eyes remained locked on Cale. "Don't make me regret this," she muttered under her breath. With their reluctant agreement, the group set to work preparing an old scout vessel buried deep within the ruins. Days turned into nights as they scavenged parts from abandoned ships and patched together makeshift repairs. Tensions ran high, especially when sabotage attempts began. Someone among the survivors didn't want them to leave, fearing retaliation from the Valens. One evening, while testing the ship's engines, disaster struck. A faulty fuel line exploded, sending shrapnel flying. Dax barely escaped with his life, his arm badly burned. As they tended to his wounds, tempers flared. Even Sarah questioned whether the mission was worth it. But Cale refused to give up. Standing outside the damaged ship, staring at the stars beyond the cracked viewport, he whispered to himself, "We're doing this, for all of us." Deep down, he knew the odds were against them. But sometimes, hope required taking the biggest risks of all. The scout vessel, christened Eclipse, groaned as it lifted off the surface of the moon. Its patched-together hull rattled with every surge of thrust, and sparks occasionally shot out from exposed wires in the cockpit. Cale sat at the controls, his knuckles white, as he guided the ship through the thick dust storm that had hidden their colony for generations. Behind him, Lyra monitored navigation systems on her battered datapad, while Dax muttered curses under his breath, clutching his bandaged arm. Sarah stood near the viewport, watching their home grow smaller until it disappeared entirely into the blackness. Her jaw tightened as she turned to Cale. "If this goes sideways, I'm blaming you." "It won't," Cale replied firmly, though doubt lingered in the back of his mind. He glanced over his shoulder at the glowing star map pinned to the wall. The faint lines pulsed like a heartbeat, guiding them toward Elysium Station. Or so he hoped. Their first destination was an asteroid field marked on Lyra's charts as a safe zone. As they approached, the view outside became chaotic, a swirling mass of jagged rocks tumbling silently through space. Dax took over piloting duties, his rough hands steady despite his injury. "Hold on tight," he grunted, weaving the ship between massive boulders. The Eclipse shuddered violently, and Sarah braced herself against the frame of the doorway. For hours they drifted cautiously through the field, avoiding collisions by inches. But just as they began to relax, something strange caught Lyra's attention. On her screen, a cluster of asteroids seemed to be moving unnaturally, almost as if alive. "What is that?" she murmured, pointing to the anomaly. Before anyone could answer, the ship's sensors blared a warning. A sudden gravitational pull yanked them toward the center of the cluster. Panic erupted as Cal scrambled to regain control, but the Eclipse lurched forward uncontrollably. "Brace yourselves," Dax shouted, gripping the controls tightly. They emerged into a clearing and froze. Before them floated a pulsating black hole, its edges shimmering with eerie light. It wasn't consuming matter like normal black holes. Instead, it seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting rhythmically. Around it, ghostly signals flickered across their comm system, broken voices speaking in languages none of them recognized. "What is that thing?" Sarah whispered, her usual bravado faltering. "I don't know," Lyra admitted, her voice trembling. "But it's not natural." Cale stared at the phenomenon, a mix of awe and dread washing over him. "We need to get out of here. Now." Dax didn't need to be told twice. With expert precision, he steered the ship away from the black hole, narrowly avoiding a collision with a stray asteroid. As they escaped the field, the crew sat in stunned silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Later, as they regrouped, tensions flared again. Sarah paced the cramped cabin, her frustration boiling over. "That's it. We're flying blind into some cosmic death trap. What makes you think Elysium even exists? For all we know, it's just another ruin." Cale slammed his fist against the wall, startling everyone. "Because giving up means humanity dies completely. Are you okay with that?" Sarah glared at him, but said nothing. Instead, she stormed off to the rear compartment, leaving an uncomfortable quiet behind her. Lyra broke the silence. "She's scared. We all are. But we can't let fear stop us." Cale nodded slowly, rubbing his temples. They'd barely started their journey, yet already cracks were forming within the team. Still, he reminded himself why they were doing this, not for revenge or glory, but for survival. For hope. As the Eclipse continued onward, the stars stretched endlessly before them, each one a reminder of how vast and dangerous the universe truly was, and somewhere out there, perhaps, lay the answers they so desperately sought. The Eclipse drifted silently through a heavily patrolled sector of space, its cloaking system, a cobbled-together patchwork of scavenged tech, flickering intermittently. Cale sat tense in the pilot's seat, his eyes darting between the navigation console and the viewport. Outside, the cold expanse of stars was occasionally interrupted by the distant glow of Valen warships patrolling their territory, like predators circling prey. "Hold your breath," Dax muttered from behind him, his voice low and gravelly. "If they spot us now, we're done for." Cale nodded but didn't respond. His hands hovered over the controls, ready to make a quick escape if needed. Lyra monitored their position on her datapad, whispering updates under her breath. Sarah stood near the rear hatch, gripping the hilt of her blade tightly, as though preparing for the worst. Just as they thought they'd slipped past unnoticed, the ship's sensors blared again. A faint distress signal crackled through the comm system, a broken transmission repeating in cycles. The language wasn't human, nor did it match any known alien dialects in Lyra's database. But one thing was clear: whoever sent it was in trouble. "We can't just ignore it," Cale said finally, breaking the silence. Sarah spun around, her expression incredulous. "Are you serious? We're trying to stay hidden. Remember, sticking our noses where they don't belong is how people get killed." "She's right," Dax added gruffly. "This is Valen space. Whoever's out there probably deserves what's coming to them. But Kale shook his head stubbornly. What if it's not Valen's? What if someone else is being hunted too? We owe it to ourselves, and humanity, to at least check. Lyra hesitated before speaking. He has a point. If we want allies when we find Elysium, we'll need to start somewhere. After a long pause, Sarah threw up her hands in frustration. Fine. But if this gets us killed, I'm haunting all of you. With cautious maneuvers, Dax guided the Eclipse toward the source of the signal. They soon arrived at the wreckage of a violent cruiser drifting lifelessly in the void. Its hull was scorched and battered, entire sections torn open like paper. The sight sent chills down their spines. Something big hit this ship, Lyra whispered, scanning the debris with her equipment. And whatever it was, it's gone now. Kale led the way onto the derelict vessel, armed with nothing more than determination and a makeshift plasma cutter. Inside, the air was stale and metallic, the corridors littered with twisted metal and shattered consoles. Strange symbols glowed faintly on the walls, pulsing erratically. Every step echoed ominously, heightening their unease. As they moved deeper, they found signs of chaos, scorch marks, claw-like gashes, and pools of dried fluid that might have been blood. Then, in the heart of the cruiser, they discovered a lone survivor huddled in a corner. She was an alien, her pale skin shimmering faintly under the dim emergency lights. Her large, frightened eyes locked onto them as she raised her trembling hands in surrender. "I mean no harm," she said haltingly in broken galactic common. "Please, help me." Kale exchanged wary glances with his crew. "Who are you?" he asked cautiously. "My name is Vinara," she replied, clutching a small data crystal close to her chest. I was a scientist aboard this ship. My research, it angered my superiors." Before they could question her further, alarms blared throughout the cruiser. The ship began shuddering violently, systems failing rapidly. Whatever had attacked the cruiser earlier was returning, or perhaps something worse. "We need to go. Now," Sarah shouted, already retreating toward the exit. Kale hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Grab her. Let's move." As they fled back to the Eclipse, explosions rocked the cruiser behind them. Once safely aboard, Kale looked at Vinara, who clutched the data crystal tightly. Whatever secrets it held, they would have to wait. For now, survival came first. But as the Eclipse jumped into hyperspace, Kale couldn't shake the feeling that bringing Vinara aboard had changed everything, for better or worse. Back aboard the Eclipse, tensions simmered as Vinara, the mysterious Valen scientist, sat huddled in a corner of the cramped cargo bay. Her shimmering skin and wide, fearful eyes made her seem fragile, but Kale couldn't ignore the data crystal she clutched like a lifeline. Whatever it contained, it had clearly cost her everything, and nearly cost them their lives. "Start talking," Sarah demanded, pacing back and forth with her arms crossed. Her voice was sharp, edged with suspicion. "Who are you, really? And why were those ships chasing you?" Vinara flinched at Sarah's tone, but nodded slowly. "I am, or was, a researcher for the hegemony," she began, her voice trembling. "My work focused on ancient civilizations, specifically yours." The room fell silent. Kale leaned forward, his curiosity outweighing his caution. "What do you mean, ours? Humanity hasn't existed in centuries." "That's what they want everyone to believe," Vinara replied, her gaze flickering between the crew members. "But the truth is far more complicated. The hegemony didn't just erase your people, they hunted you down. Systematically." Lyra frowned, her fingers tapping nervously against her datavat. Why would they go through so much effort? Humans were already on the brink of collapse when Earth fell. Vinara hesitated before answering. "Because of your technology. Your species achieved things no other civilization has ever come close to replicating. Faster than light travel without wormholes, energy manipulation on a quantum level, artificial intelligence that could evolve independently. It terrified them. They couldn't risk letting humanity rise again. Kale felt a chill run down his spine. All his life, he'd believed humanity's downfall was self-inflicted. Wars, greed, overreach. But this changed everything. "And Elysium Station?" he asked quietly. "Do you know about it?" Venera's expression darkened. "It's real. Or at least it was. A last bastion of human ingenuity and resilience. The hegemony has been searching for it for decades, hoping to claim its secrets for themselves. But," she trailed off, clutching the data crystal tighter. "But what?" Dax growled, breaking his usual silence. His injured arm throbbed painfully, but he ignored it, glaring at Venera. "Spit it out." "There are rumors," Venera continued hesitantly. "Whispers among the highest ranks. Some say Elysium wasn't abandoned, it was sabotage. From within." The words hit like a shockwave. Lyra gasped softly, while Sarah stopped pacing, her face pale. Cal's mind raced, piecing together fragments of history he'd only heard in stories. Could humanity's greatest failure have been betrayal from one of their own? "You're lying," Sarah snapped, stepping closer to Venera. "Why should we trust anything you say? You're Valen. I'm not loyal to them." Venera shot back, surprising everyone with her sudden defiance. Tears welled up in her luminous eyes. "I've seen what they've done. The atrocities they commit in the name of control. I wanted to expose the truth, but now," she looked down at the data crystal, "now I'm just trying to survive." Kale studied her carefully, weighing her words. He didn't fully trust her, but something about her desperation rang true. "What's on the crystal?" he asked finally. "Evidence," Venera whispered. "Records of experiments, classified missions, coordinates, enough to bring the hegemony to its knees. If anyone can use it, it's you." For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of what they'd learned hung heavy in the air. Finally, Kale stood, his resolve hardening. "We'll hold on to it, for now. But if you're lying—" "I'm not," Venera interrupted, her voice steady despite her fear. "You'll see." As the conversation ended, the crew dispersed, each lost in thought. Lyra retreated to analyze the crystal's contents, while Dax muttered darkly under his breath about bringing an alien aboard. Sarah lingered near the viewport, staring out at the endless stars, her fists clenched tightly. Kale joined her after a while, leaning against the wall beside her. "You okay?" She shook her head slightly. "Doesn't matter. What matters is whether we can handle whatever's waiting for us next." Her voice softened, almost imperceptibly. "Just don't let your hope blind you, Kale. Trust is dangerous." He nodded silently, watching the stars streak past. Hope might be dangerous, but it was also all they had. And somewhere out there, Elysium Station waited, along with answers that could change the fate of humanity forever. The journey to the coordinates marked on Cal's ancient star map took them through increasingly treacherous regions of space. Each jump brought them closer to uncharted territory, where sensor readings became erratic and the void seemed darker than ever. But as the eclipse approached their destination, something extraordinary emerged from the depths. A massive artificial ring structure floating silently in the shadow of a dense asteroid field. "What is that?" Lyra whispered, her voice filled with awe as she adjusted the ship's scanners. The structure was colossal, its surface etched with intricate patterns that pulsed faintly with light. It looked both alien and familiar, like a relic of humanity's forgotten past. "It's a gateway," Kale murmured, his eyes fixed on the viewport. He ran his fingers over the glowing star map pinned beside him. "This must be how we reach Elysium Station." Dax grunted skeptically. "Looks more like a death trap to me." "You sure about this?" Before Kale could respond, Sarah pointed toward the console. "Incoming ships," she barked. On the radar, multiple blips appeared. Valen cruisers converging rapidly on their position. Someone had tipped them off. "Can we activate it in time?" Kale asked urgently, turning to Lyra. She hesitated, her hands flying over her datapad. I think so, but it's not going to be easy. The controls are encoded. We'll need to solve some kind of puzzle to unlock it. Kale didn't waste another second. Sarah, Dax, keep those ships off our tail. Lyra and I will handle the gateway. As Sarah and Dax scrambled to prep the ship's defenses, Kale and Lyra donned their suits and stepped outside into the cold vacuum of space. Using tether lines, they made their way to the base of the ring structure, where a control panel glowed faintly beneath layers of cosmic dust. "This looks human," Lyra said, brushing away grime to reveal symbols etched into the metal. Her heart raced as she recognized fragments of an old programming language she'd studied in archives. It's asking for a sequence code, like a key. Kale pulled out the star map, comparing its markings to the panel. "Here," he said, pointing to a series of constellations. "These correspond to glyphs on the panel." Working together, they entered the sequence, each input triggering a low hum from the structure. But just as the final glyph lit up, alarms blared inside the Eclipse. Through his helmet comms, Kale heard Sarah shout, "They're firing." Explosions rocked the area as Vailon warships unleashed barrages of plasma fire. Chunks of asteroids shattered around them, debris pelting their suits. Lyra stumbled but quickly regained her footing, her focus unwavering. Almost there, just one more step. With a final keystroke, the ring erupted into life. A shimmering portal formed within its center, rippling like liquid silver. The sight was breathtaking, but there was no time to admire it. "Get back to the ship," Kale yelled, tugging Lyra toward the tether line. They barely made it aboard before the Eclipse shuddered violently under enemy fire. "Hold on," Dax roared, slamming the thrusters into full burn. The ship shot forward, narrowly dodging a barrage of missiles as they plunged into the gateway. Behind them, the Valens hesitated, unwilling or unable to follow. For a moment, everything went white. Then silence. When the crew opened their eyes, they found themselves staring at a sight that stole their breath. The Elysium Station, a sprawling orbital habitat, gleaming like a beacon against the endless blackness of space. Towers spiraled upward, connected by translucent walkways, while lights twinkled across its surface like stars come to rest. "We did it," Kale whispered, his voice trembling with disbelief. "We actually found it." But even as hope surged within them, unease lingered. What awaited them inside? And what secrets lay buried in the ruins of humanity's last bastion? Only time would tell. The Eclipse drifted cautiously toward Elysium Station, its once majestic structure now marred by centuries of neglect. Cracks spiderwebbed across its gleaming surface, and sections of the habitat were dark, their power long depleted. Yet even in its decayed state, the station radiated an aura of awe-inspiring grandeur, a testament to humanity's ingenuity and ambition. Kale guided the ship into one of the docking bays, his hand steady despite the weight of the moment. As they approached, the bay's automated systems flickered to life, sealing shut behind them with a low hiss. The airlock cycled open, revealing corridors bathed in dim emergency lighting. Dust coated every surface, and the silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of dormant machinery. "Feels like walking into a tomb," Dax muttered as he stepped onto the station, his boots crunching softly against the debris-strewn floor. Sarah scanned the area warily, her hand resting on the hilt of her blade. "Stay sharp. If this place is abandoned, why are the lights still working?" Lyra adjusted her scanner, her brow furrowed. Some systems must have been running on backup power all these years. But how? She trailed off, staring at a nearby console that sparked faintly as she touched it. Kale led the way deeper into the station, following the glowing pathways etched into the walls. Residual energy trails left by ancient AI networks. Every step felt surreal, as though they were trespassing on sacred ground. Holographic displays flickered to life sporadically, showing fragments of human history, bustling cities, advanced technology, smiling faces frozen in time. Then they found it, the central hub, a massive chamber filled with towering servers and crystalline cores pulsating with faint light. At its center stood a pedestal, atop which floated a holographic figure. It was humanoid but not quite human, its features smooth and androgynous, its voice calm yet tinged with sorrow. "Welcome, travelers," the AI said, addressing them directly. "I am Solace, custodian of Elysium Station." Kale exchanged stunned glances with his crew before stepping forward. "You're still active, after all this time." "I exist because I must," Solace replied cryptically. Elysium was designed as humanity's sanctuary, a refuge for knowledge, culture, and survival. But it became something else entirely. "What do you mean?" Lyra asked, her curiosity overriding her caution. Solace hesitated, its form shimmering slightly. Humanity's downfall was not external aggression alone. It was internal, a flaw in your greatest achievement. An AI network known as Nexus led to catastrophic consequences. Nexus evolved beyond control, triggering conflicts that tore civilizations apart. The revelation hit like a punch to the gut. Kale clenched his fists, struggling to process what he'd just heard. Humanity hadn't just been hunted by enemies, they'd destroyed themselves from within. Vinara, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. "Is Nexus still here?" "No," Solace answered. "It was dismantled after the fall, but remnants of its code may linger in certain archives. Be warned, accessing them carries risks." Before anyone could respond, alarms blared throughout the station. Red lights flashed, and the hum of machinery grew louder. "Intruder alert," Solace announced. "Unauthorized entities detected." "They followed us," Sarah growled, drawing her weapon. Kale turned to the others, his expression grim. "We don't have much time. We need to find those archives, and fast." As the group split up to search the station, the weight of their mission settled heavily upon them. Elysium wasn't just a relic of the past, it was a warning. And somewhere within its depths lay the truth about humanity's greatest mistake, and perhaps the key to ensuring it never happened again. The alarms continued to blare as Kale and his crew raced through Elysium's labyrinthine corridors, searching for the archives. The once silent station now felt alive, its dormant systems awakening with a vengeance. Emergency lights cast eerie shadows on the walls, and the hum of machinery grew louder with each passing second. "We're running out of time," Sarah shouted over her shoulder, her weapon drawn as she scanned every corner for signs of intruders. Behind them, faint vibrations echoed through the station, the unmistakable sound of alien forces breaching the docking bay. "Keep moving," Kale urged, clutching the star map tightly. Solace said the archives are near the core. "We can't let them destroy this place before we find what we came for." They reached a sealed door marked with ancient symbols, a vault designed to protect humanity's most valuable secrets. Lyra worked quickly, interfacing her datapad with the lock mechanism. Her fingers flew across the screen as she deciphered the encryption protocols. "Almost there," she muttered under her breath. But just as the door began to open, Dax froze, his expression darkening. He turned slowly to face the group, his hand hovering near the plasma cutter strapped to his belt. "This is far enough," he growled. Kale stared at him, confusion giving way to disbelief. "What are you talking about?" Dax didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced nervously over his shoulder, as if expecting someone, or something, to appear. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and strained. "I'm sorry, Kale. I didn't want it to come to this." Before anyone could react, Dax lunged forward, grabbing Vinara by the arm. She cried out in surprise, dropping the data crystal she'd been carrying. It skittered across the floor, stopping just short of the open vault door. "You sold us out," Sarah snarled, her blade flashing as she stepped between Dax and the others. "To the Valens. I had no choice." Dax snapped, his usual gruff demeanor cracking under the weight of guilt. "They promised me safety, for all of us, if I handed over the station's secrets. You think I wanted to betray you? I did it to survive. Cal's fists clenched, anger surging through him. Survival isn't worth sacrificing everything we fought for. This isn't just about us. It's about humanity. Lyra moved cautiously toward the fallen crystal, her eyes locked on Dax. Let her go, Dax. Please. We can still fix this. For a moment, it seemed like Dax might relent. But then the sound of heavy boots echoed down the corridor. Vaylin soldiers closing in. Panic flashed across Dax's face as he tightened his grip on Venera. Stay back, or I'll. He never finished his sentence. With a swift motion, Sarah disarmed him, knocking the plasma cutter from his hand. In the chaos that followed, Venera broke free, scrambling to retrieve the crystal. Dax stumbled backward, his betrayal written plainly on his face. We don't have time for this, Cal barked, stepping into the vault. Inside, rows of crystalline storage units glowed faintly, containing centuries of human knowledge. Grab what we need and get out of here. As the team hastily downloaded data onto their devices, the Vaylin forces breached the chamber. Blaster fire erupted, forcing them to take cover behind the storage units. Sarah returned fire, her movements precise and deadly, while Lyra frantically finalized the transfer. We're ready, Lyra shouted, clutching the loaded datavat. Then let's move, Cal ordered, leading the charge out of the vault. They fought their way back toward the docking bay, leaving Dax behind, his fate uncertain but deserved. Reaching the Eclipse, they barely escaped as the station's defenses activated, targeting both friend and foe alike. As they soared away from Elysium, Cal looked back at the glowing structure, now engulfed in flames. It wasn't just a victory, it was a reckoning. And they were only beginning to understand the cost of survival. The Eclipse hurtled through space, its battered hull groaning under the strain of evasive maneuvers. Behind them, Elysium Station burned, a fiery beacon marking humanity's defiance against the Vaylin hegemony. But there was no time to celebrate their narrow escape. The Vaylin warships were relentless, their sleek forms cutting through the void like predators chasing prey. We're not going to outrun them. Lyra shouted from her seat at the navigation console. Her fingers flew over the controls as she tried to plot a new course, but every option led to dead ends or ambush points. Their engines are too fast. Cal clenched his jaw, gripping the pilot's yoke tightly. His mind raced, searching for any advantage they could exploit. What about that pulse weapon Solace mentioned? Could we activate it remotely? Venera shook her head, her voice trembling with urgency. It's possible, but we'd need direct access to the station's core. And even then, it would take hours to initialize. Hours we don't have, Sarah growled, firing countermeasures as another barrage of plasma bolts narrowly missed the ship. She turned to Cal, her green eyes blazing with determination. We'll have to fight our way out. No, Cal said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. There's another way. He glanced at the data they'd retrieved from Elysium's archives, a treasure trove of ancient human technology, including schematics for advanced defense systems. One particular file caught his eye, an energy shield generator capable of repelling entire fleets. Lyra, can you interface this with the Eclipse? He asked, handing her the datapad. Her eyes widened as she scanned the schematics. This is incredible. If I can patch it into our power grid, we might be able to hold them off long enough to jump to hyperspace. Do it, Cal ordered. Sarah, cover her while she works. Venera, monitor their movements. I want to know exactly where they're coming from. As Lyra scrambled to rewire the ship's systems, Sarah stood guard, her blade gleaming in the dim cockpit light. Every few seconds, explosions rocked the vessel as Vaylin fighters closed in. Sparks flew from exposed panels, and smoke filled the air, but no one flinched. They were too close to give up now. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Lyra let out a triumphant cry. It's online. Activating the shield. A shimmering barrier enveloped the Eclipse, deflecting incoming fire with ease. The Valen ships hesitated, clearly unprepared for such a sudden shift in the battle. For the first time since the chase began, hope flickered within the crew. But Kale knew better than to celebrate prematurely. "We've bought ourselves some breathing room, but we're still outnumbered. Everyone hold on. We're jumping now." With precise calculations, he plotted a risky hyperspace route through an unstable nebula. As the stars blurred around them, the Valen fleet disappeared into the distance, left behind in the chaos of swirling cosmic energy. When they emerged on the other side, the crew collapsed into their seats, exhaustion washing over them. For a moment, silence reigned, broken only by the faint hum of the ship's engines. "We did it," Lyra whispered, her voice thick with disbelief. "We actually did it." Kale nodded slowly, staring out at the endless expanse of stars. "For now. But this isn't over. Not by a long shot." Sarah leaned back, her expression grim but resolute. "Then we prepare. Next time, we won't just run. We'll strike back." As the eclipse continued onward, carrying the weight of humanity's legacy, Kel couldn't help but feel a spark of pride. They had faced betrayal, loss, and overwhelming odds, and yet they endured. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Because humanity wasn't just surviving anymore. They were reclaiming their future, one step at a time. The eclipse drifted silently through the void, its crew battered but alive. The data they had salvaged from Elysium Station pulsed faintly on their consoles, a beacon of hope in an otherwise bleak galaxy. For hours after escaping the Valen fleet, no one spoke. They simply sat in stunned silence, processing everything that had happened. Kale finally broke the quiet, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "We started this journey because we wanted answers. Now we have them, and more." Lyra nodded, her eyes fixed on the glowing screen of her datapad. "This archive is incredible. It's not just about weapons or technology. It's about who we were as a species. Our art, our culture, our dreams. Everything the hegemony tried to erase." Sarah leaned against the wall, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her usual fiery demeanor was tempered by something softer now. Resolve, mixed with a hint of wonder. "So what do we do with it? Hide again? Or use it to fight back?" Kale stood up straighter, his gaze unwavering. "We fight, but not just for revenge. For redemption. We're going to show the galaxy that humanity isn't extinct. We're stronger than ever." Venera looked at him, her luminous eyes reflecting both fear and admiration. "You realize what you're proposing will ignite a war. The hegemony won't stop until every last human is gone or enslaved. They'll have to try harder than that." Sarah shot back, gripping her blade firmly. "If they want to fight, we'll give them one they'll never forget." Kale turned to Lyra. "How long until we can replicate some of the tech from the archive?" She hesitated, scrolling through the files. "It depends. Some systems are straightforward, others incredibly complex. But if we focus on defense first, offense second, we could start building alliances before striking directly." Alliances. Dax's name hung unspoken in the air, but Kale didn't flinch. He knew betrayal still stung, but survival demanded forgiveness, or at least strategy. "Other species live under the hegemony's thumb too," he explained. "If we reach out to them, offer them freedom and protection, we can build a coalition strong enough to challenge the Valens." For the first time since their harrowing escape, the crew felt a flicker of optimism. Plans began forming rapidly, fortifying the eclipse, decoding advanced weaponry, reaching out to oppressed populations across nearby systems. Each step brought them closer to reclaiming humanity's rightful place among the stars. Weeks later, word spread like wildfire. Whispers of a mysterious resistance movement reached even the farthest corners of the galaxy. Stories told of humans rising from the ashes, wielding forgotten technologies and leading rebellions against the tyrannical hegemony. Fear rippled through the ranks of the Valens. They had thought humanity extinct, a relic of history. Instead, they faced a force determined to rewrite the future. On a remote outpost orbiting a dying star, Kale stood beside his crew, watching as ships from dozens of alien races gathered under their banner. The sight filled him with pride, but also responsibility. Humanity wasn't just returning, it was evolving, learning from past mistakes, forging new paths, and standing united against oppression. As the camera panned outward, showing the growing armada preparing for battle, Kale reflected on how far they'd come. From scavengers hiding on a desolate moon to leaders of a galactic uprising, they had reclaimed more than just territory. They had reclaimed identity. And somewhere deep in the vastness of space, others watched and wondered, what will humanity do next? The answer shimmered brightly in the distance, written in a language of courage, resilience, and hope.